I didn't bring the toy home because it looked unusual or unsettling. I brought it home because it looked ordinary enough to disappear into the background, the kind of worn, stuffed thing you'd pass by without registering. One ear was bent, the stitching along its mouth uneven, as if it had been repaired quickly and without care. I don't have children, and there was no reason for it to be in my apartment, but at the time that detail didn't stand out as important. The first night, I placed it on a chair near my bed, facing the wall rather than the room, because something about the way its plastic eyes reflected light made me uncomfortable. I didn't think about it long enough to question myself and went to sleep assuming I would forget it was even there. When I woke up at 3:17 in the morning, it wasn't because of a sound or a dream, but because the room felt occupied in a way that didn't match what I remembered. The chair was empty, and the toy was sitting upright on the floor, positioned carefully rather than fallen, far enough away to seem intentional, but close enough to notice. I told myself it must have slipped during the night and picked it up without hesitation, placing it back on the chair and returning to bed. The second night, I put it inside the closet and closed the door completely, sliding a shoe in front of it without consciously deciding to. When I woke again around the same time, the closet door was open. The shoe nudged aside, and the toy was sitting at the foot of the bed, closer than before. I didn't touch it immediately and stayed still under the blanket, waiting for something to justify the fear building in my chest. But nothing happened, and the room remained silent. By the third night, I placed the toy on the kitchen counter, far from the bedroom, leaving the lights on, and even taking a photo of where I left it, something I didn't realize mattered until I later checked the timestamp. I woke to the faint sound of fabric brushing against fabric, not footsteps or breathing, but something softer and slower. The toy was on the bed, inches from my chest, its head tilted slightly to the side. In a way I hadn't seen before, I backed myself into the corner of the bed, grabbed it, and threw it into the hallway before locking my bedroom door and sitting against it until morning, listening for movement that never came. The silence that followed was worse than noise because nothing tested the door or made itself known. Every time I blinked, I imagined it repositioning itself somewhere just out of sight, not rushing or crawling, but waiting for me to relax. The next morning, I walked several blocks and threw the toy into a public trash bin without looking back, telling myself I was done participating in whatever this was. When I returned home, it was sitting neatly on my couch, facing the door, as if it had been placed there to watch for my return, rather than dropped or tossed. After that, I stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time and kept lights on while pacing through the apartment. The toy didn't move while I watched it, but it changed locations whenever I wasn't looking, appearing on the bathroom sink, the kitchen table, and eventually back on the chair beside my bed. I began to notice a pattern in its behavior, realizing it never moved while I was standing and only changed position after I sat or lay down. It seemed to respond not to attention, but to the moment my body relaxed. By the seventh night, exhaustion made it impossible to stay upright, and when I finally lay down, I felt the mattress adjust slowly beside me, as if something were settling into place without weight. I didn't open my eyes because I understood that whatever was happening depended on me letting go first. Since then, I don't try to move the toy anymore and leave it wherever it chooses to be, because when I respect that, it stays still. When I resist, it moves closer, and sometimes, just as I begin to drift toward sleep, I feel fabric brush my arm gently, like something making sure I'm still there. After the first week, I stopped pretending I could control where the toy stayed. I learned that moving it wasn't defiance, but an invitation, and that every attempt to assert ownership over it only encouraged correction. If I placed it on the chair, it appeared on the bed. If I left it in the hallway, it waited outside the bathroom door. The closer I tried to keep it away from where I slept, the closer it positioned itself by morning, as though distance itself offended it. I began waking before it moved, sensing the shift in the room. Seconds before anything changed, the air would feel tighter, not heavier, just rearranged, and the quiet would deepen in a way that felt deliberate. When I opened my eyes during those moments, the toy was always still, exactly where I had last seen it. But when I closed them again, I could feel the space beside me, adjusting slowly, patiently, as if something were aligning itself to my body rather than climbing onto the bed. I tried denying it access by staying awake, but exhaustion only shortened the gap between changes. Once, after nearly 40 hours without sleep, I watched the toy from across the room and saw it tilt forward by a fraction of an inch without falling, correcting itself before I could react. It wasn't movement the way bodies move. It was repositioning, subtle and economical, as if it didn't need momentum to change where it belonged. After that, it stopped respecting barriers entirely. Closet doors remained shut, but the toy appeared inside the bedroom anyway. Windows stayed locked, yet it waited beneath them in the morning. When I wedged it beneath a heavy box, I found the box untouched, and the toy resting neatly on top of it, centered, as though weight had never applied to it in the first place. The apartment itself seemed to assist, furniture shifting just enough to create clear paths I hadn't noticed before, spaces opening where none existed the night prior. The worst change came when the toy began choosing positions that limited where I could go. It waited in doorways. It rested beside the stove when I cooked. It appeared at the foot of the stairs in the building hallway, forcing me to step around it while pretending to passing neighbors that nothing was wrong. I realized then that it wasn't following me randomly. It was learning how I moved and placing itself where hesitation would cost me time. One night, I tried something different. I spoke to it without touching it, telling myself the act was meaningless even as my voice shook. I told it it wasn't welcome, that it didn't belong here, that it needed to stay where it was. The toy didn't respond immediately, but when I woke the next morning, every piece of furniture in the apartment had been shifted inward by inches, tightening the space until moving through the rooms required careful navigation. The toy sat in the center of the living room floor, perfectly upright, as if it were demonstrating the consequences of being addressed. From then on, it began correcting me directly. If I stood too long in one place, it appeared near my feet. If I paced, it repositioned ahead of me, forcing a change in direction. When I tried sleeping on the couch, it waited on the armrest, angled toward my face. When I returned to the bed, it rested beside the pillow, its fabric brushing my cheek. Whenever I turned, I stopped asking myself how it moved and focused instead on how accurately it anticipated me. The final stage didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived through compliance. The more I adjusted my behavior to avoid it, the less it needed to move at all. The apartment grew quieter, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was settled. The toy stayed close, without repositioning, and the room felt finished in a way that made resistance feel unnecessary. I slept longer during that period, not peacefully, but deeply enough that waking felt like an interruption rather than relief. The night I understood what it wanted, I woke to find it pressed against my chest, not heavy, just present. Its fabric warm in a way it hadn't been before. I didn't push it away, and it didn't move closer. The space around us felt exact, measured, as though any deviation would cause imbalance. When I shifted slightly, it adjusted instantly, maintaining contact without pressure, teaching me how stillness solved everything. Since then, it hasn't needed to move on its own. I wake when it wants me awake. I sleep when the room allows it. The apartment no longer rearranges itself because there's nothing left to correct. The toy stays where it belongs now, and so do I. When I think about leaving, the space tightens subtly, not threatening, just reminding me that I already fit perfectly here, and that anything removed from its place leaves behind a shape that demands to be filled. I don't try to leave anymore, because every night I close my eyes, I can feel it ensuring I stay exactly where I'm supposed to be.